This is the Tesoro AI podcast with Darius Gant. AI is changing the world and fast. This episode is coming to you courtesy of Tesoro AI, the #1 recruiting service for software development and AI talent.
All right, Sarah, welcome to the show. We appreciate you taking some time out to join us.
Yeah, thanks, Darius, for having me. Really excited.
Absolutely. So before we dive into all of the great things you're doing with Seq, would love for you to add some more color around your background. I thought it was, interesting. Looks like you were on the finance side before, not necessarily in a finance role, but with them, finance being one of the original adopters of data science techniques. We'd love to hear more about that early progression in your career to the point, and we'll stop just short of Seq.
Yeah, so I did get my career started in the financial industry. Before that, I actually was an astrophysicist at UCLA and Caltech. So yeah, I started out doing more astrophysics type of research, and I happened to do an internship, in the quant finance world, just in LA, a place called LA Capital Management. And that's where I learned what it was like to be a quant. And I had never really heard of that area of research or area of finance before. And I was just like, wow, this is a great fit because I had always been interested in finance, but didn't really
Yeah.
know if I was a good fit to be an investment banker, which is kind of the hot job at the time.
Right.
And so, yeah, it was really appealing to me. And I ended up moving out to the East Coast and starting my career initially in high frequency trading, actually, as a quant. And then I ended up working at a couple startups in the financial industry, more in the alternative data space.
Okay.
Alternative data is kind of still a niche. I don't know if a lot of people know fully what it actually is. It's just
Yeah. How
unusual data.
would you define alternative data?
So it's called alternative because it's an alternative to traditional data, like market data that you get, price, volume, stuff like that. Alternative data is more like satellite data, foot traffic, credit card data, any sort of data set that contains alpha that you don't necessarily get through your traditional like Bloomberg terminal.
Okay. Okay. That makes sense. Yeah. And when you say, alpha, it's alternative data you can use to then generate returns.
Yeah, it contains information that can be used to have an edge in financial markets because it's information that you're going to know that other people don't know that you can trade on.
Got it. Okay. That's helpful. Okay. So startup experience, I see you were was that head of data science. I'm curious at what point did you decide, you know what, time for me to strike out on my own? I've got some ideas within this AI space that I think I can make some waves with.
Yeah, well, I had that experience. I started my career at a bigger company. I worked at these two startups. I ended up going back to a bigger company at Citadel. So I was leading a team doing alternative data research there. And, I had worked at 4 different places at that point and just kept noticing this same pain point just cropping up over and over again, where I just was doing a lot of manual work that
Okay.
I wasn't really expecting, and it just, the longer I spent in that career path, the more I kind of just grew tired of doing this kind of manual work.
Yeah.
Not just for myself, I would be like, I want to learn this thing about the data, but I'd have to just type out all this stuff just to get to the answer that I already knew I wanted. But it was also helping my colleagues too, who were much less technical and they didn't even have access to the data sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
They would constantly have questions and they'd always be coming up to me asking me for help just with various tasks. And then I couldn't do the stuff that I wanted to work on. And what was weird is they even had special software that we had bought for them to use to just get access to the data. And the software just wasn't enough. They kept having more and more questions that the software couldn't handle. So they would be coming to me, and that was kind of the cause of that. So that was really the pain point that I was experiencing. And along the way, when you're a data scientist, it's kind of interesting because you're doing data analysis, but you're also doing machine learning work as
Okay.
well. That's kind of what makes up that career path.
Hmm.
So I knew enough about machine learning that I was following large language models since the
Hmm.
very beginning, like GPT-2. And, after following the models for a long enough time, I saw them getting better and better.
Right.
And I just had enough conviction at one point where I was just like, I know that these models are going to solve this problem. And I believe that AI will be very good at working with data and solving these problems. And that's what motivated me to start Seek.
Okay. Okay. So, but basically, what you're saying is, there's a ton of data that you wanted to use to make some sort of decision at Citadel, obviously, investment decisions. And you had access to a software platform, but for one reason or another, the software platform wasn't able to serve up the data in a way that was going to be most helpful to both you and your team. And then to get to the ultimate point where you wanted to get with the data, you would have to go through a bunch of manual processes to arrive. Does that encapsulate kind of the problem?
I think that's a great encapsulation of the problem. Yeah. And it's not limited to financial services either. That's, the area I worked in, but through my alternative data startup experience, I also had exposure to consumer packaged goods businesses who
Okay.
were using that same data actually. And so I noticed they were having these kinds of problems in those type of companies. And so I really developed this hypothesis, like I think that any company that has a data team
Yeah.
and is working with large amounts of data, which is nowadays it's most companies. I was like, yeah, they're going to have this problem. So Seek is, it has the potential to be very horizontal and kind of ubiquitous because so many companies have data. But yeah, we're starting with some, specific areas, but it could definitely be used in a lot of areas.
Right, right. And so you mentioned LLMs, right? And you exposed to AI, but then saw that LLMs got a lot better, and you saw that you could then apply LLMs to this problem that you've discovered with the data. What was the approach? How did you think about actually solving this problem with the use of LLMs?
It was very different, I think, when I was starting out because it was, 2021 was the official year that I started the company. We were bootstrapped in the beginning, just me. So, it was just me for a while. And then I brought on more people in 2022.
Hmm.
But yeah, when it was just me, I was really thinking about the problem. Like I was looking at the Spider leaderboard, which is a pretty well followed academic leaderboard in this sort of area of querying structured data sets. And I was looking at the best models on that leaderboard, and they were actually custom built deep learning models. So Codex and GPT-3, I think, were new that year in 2021, and so kind of the status quo is like these custom built neural net models where you were just tweaking like, the architecture of these models. So I
Hmm.
actually was studying just building deep learning models that year, not so much thinking about, how can I leverage third party models or, we didn't have like llama or anything like that back
Right.
then. So I was thinking about it that way back then. I don't know if that's, too in the weeds technical, but long story short, it's like, we really only thought about building agents for these large language models in 2022. That's really
Mhm.
when that shift started to happen.
Okay. Okay. And today, what does the business look like? Or I should say, what does the product look like today?
Yeah, so today it's a web app. Just go into your browser, you go to the app. You can be anybody, you don't have to be technical. And you just, there's a very simple search bar or a chat bar, whatever you want to call it. And you just go in and you can either just ask a question if there's a data question on your mind that you would
Hmm.
normally ask your data team. Or sometimes people don't know what they want to ask. They just want to know, what data do I have access to? They want to get smarter about what's the data in their company. So Seek can also help kind of those type of use cases by suggesting like, what data do I have? What can I ask about? Helping in that regard as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Very interesting because I don't know that a lot of people think about, well, I'm inside of this corporation. We've got a ton of data. I can actually just go in and ask. Well, actually, one of the things I want to ask you is in that scenario where I'm an employee of the company, there's all this data that the company has provided access to Seek. How do you think about who is able to access what data? Are there some parameters that you set, right? Because I can imagine a scenario. I don't want to upload compensation figures for everyone in the company, and then we could just put in a random query, and I could see, wait, how much is Sarah making?
Yeah, that's actually the canonical use case that we always get from, people that are interested in using Seek. Exactly. It's like you don't want certain people, most people seeing the HR data, you know, but maybe you're okay with most people seeing some of the product data or user data. It depends on the company, but yeah, absolutely. You only want certain groups of people to see certain types of data, and you don't want someone to pull a good one on the AI, and just try to use the AI to get access to something that they really shouldn't have access to. So all of that kind of happens at the governance layer for us. The way that works is oftentimes our customers have already set up certain types of permissioning in other apps. Like a common one is we plug into Snowflake.
Got it.
And in
Okay.
Snowflake, oftentimes they have all these different roles and users already set up in there.
Mhm.
So Seek can just use anything they've already built. We can just kind of transfer that into our products so that when you're working with the AI will not let you get access to certain types of data because it's hitting the database itself.
Mhm.
And the database itself has all those rules that have these limits.
So it's understanding who is actually making this query. So if I open up a tab in my browser, I'm using Seek, it understands like this is Darius, this is the access Darius has based on how Snowflake has been configured.
Yeah, that's just an example. I mean, we plug into all sorts of sources of data like Databricks, Redshift, all the kind of big ones. And, there's governance in those products, or sometimes our customers define governance outside of the database as well in
Mhm.
other types of places. And so that's one of the first things we do is we learn about how are, creating roles and users today. And then we just work to recreate that in Seek before anybody gets access to it.
If you're a hiring manager and you appreciate the unique skill sets required to build AI solutions, then I would highly suggest you get your hands on our AI talent salary guide. As you know, one of the greatest challenges in building AI products is acquiring the right team. Over 100 plus pages, we dive deep into our global AI talent acquisition strategies. And with our networks in Latin America, we also provide you with actionable advice on how you can scale up your AI team cost efficiently. Once you explore our AI talent acquisition strategies, you'll never look at hiring the same way again. Links are in the description. And you mentioned you all have, it's a horizontal solution, right? But you started with a few verticals. Would love for you to walk through maybe some use cases, some common use cases where you've seen folks ROI, high ROI out of Seek.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'll start with consumer packaged goods because it's a really interesting industry. You have your smaller companies that maybe are even only like a year or two old on kind of the earlier, smaller side. But then you have the giants that are in like the Fortune 50, Fortune 100. But they're all consumer packaged goods. They're all just making goods like beverages, food, clothing, whatever it is for their customers. And we work actually with all sizes of consumer packaged goods companies.
Hmm.
So we have kind of the smaller ones, those ones, have oftentimes a strong e-commerce aspect. And I think they have a lot of questions about things like what kind of people should I reach out to? What times, optimal times of day, should I reach out to people? How do I know my inventory is running out for the most popular items? What items get returned the most? What's the behavior of people asking for refunds? What colors of my products sell the best? There's just so many questions you can ask about your behavior of your customers, learning more about that, learning about your products, learning about how to reach your customers. So, and inventory and supply chain, just trying to make that more efficient. I would say those are the kind of things we've helped the smaller companies with.
Yeah.
The bigger companies are definitely different. Some of them are selling into like big retailers, like supermarkets, for example. And so they have different types of questions. Like they can ask questions like, what kind of promotions should we put together in a certain supermarket for a certain type of user that they've already done a lot of work identifying? Looking at like what kind of items are commonly sold together, or cohorting customers into different types of groups and looking at what they're buying. So those are some examples in consumer packaged goods.
Yeah. And I imagine that the query result can only be as good as the data that Seek has access to. If I'm a corporation and I want to maximize my query results, what are some of the things that I should be thinking about now in terms of my, well, the question was in terms of the data, but there could be other things that I should be thinking about now as a company who wants to use AI LLMs to access all of these, both my internal data and all of the data that's been the LLMs have been trained on.
That's a really excellent question. Um, I think it is very important to have a great data engineering team if you're planning on giving AI access to that data. I think that's where it all begins, is if you're on the smaller side and you don't have a data team yet, but you kind of want to start a data initiative. I think that one of the first hires needs to be a leader that kind of knows how to properly set up the data engineering aspect of the business, because that's the foundation where you're defining what all of the columns mean and what all of the tables are and how they all relate to each other. So that's what I would say at a high level. For businesses that already have a data team, they've already been working with data for a long time. Those are usually the bigger companies.
Mhm.
They're so far along, it's really hard to just gut renovate all your data engineering in one day just to maybe clean it up so that it can be readable for AI and it can work
Mhm.
better. So I think for companies like that, I think it's actually an opportunity for AI companies like Seek to help them kind of just take the data that they have and find ways to automate or accelerate making it more machine readable so that it is in a state where it's more accessible to an AI agent that can understand it fully and be able to
Mhm.
deliver accurate results. So Seek offers that kind of capability actually to our customers that
Mhm.
already have data, but maybe they're not satisfied with how an AI agent would perceive it. Like, for example, if columns are named weirdly, what do you do? An AI is not going to understand that. A human's not going to understand that.
Yeah.
So we have ways of working with our customers to treat all of those sort of issues in advance of actually connecting it to the agent. And it doesn't take a long time either. It can take like a week or two. So it's not a huge initiative, which is a really big benefit of AI as well, because, you know, if we weren't able to do this with AI, this sort of thing could take months or years.
Right. In your experience, as you've seen, you've got these companies who want to plug into Seek. They've got data that is ready. They've got data that is not ready. What are some of the common errors that you've seen for the data? Well, maybe we can approach it a different way. What best practices? What have you seen from customers where you're like, hey, look, great. This data is good to go. I'm glad you did X. And the data that you cannot use, but would love to use, what are some of the errors that companies have made? And I'm thinking about folks who, they do have a ton of data. They don't necessarily have that, person who created a great data infrastructure for them as a way for them to kind of get ahead of the game.
Yeah, there's so many ways to answer that. I think that where I'll start is I think the more that we learn about large language models, the more we realize that communicating to them is, has so many parallels to communicating with people, and data is no exception. So, again, the example of like, say you have a column that's just called like 1, 2, 3 or something. You put that in front of a human, and there are maybe a couple of things that human could do to try to learn what the column means. Like you can look at what data is in the column,
Mhm.
How does it relate to other aspects of the data set? And they could make an educated guess, but wouldn't it be easier and more accurate if you just told the human what the column meant? And so I do think that the more documentation you have about what does your data look like and what does it do and what is its purpose and how is it used by people in the business, that's going to be so helpful, not just for an AI, but for humans too, like onboarding new humans into the business.
Yeah.
When you think about Seek, we've been thinking about it lately more from a perspective of like you're onboarding an AI onto your data team to help you work with your data. And it's just you have to automate all that onboarding because, that's the most efficient way to connect Seek to your data. But it's like once you create all that onboarding material, it actually makes it easier to onboard people as well.
Mm,
So that's kind of the first thing I'll say is like a good kind of sniff test is just thinking, could a human understand what's going on in my data? And if that's the case, then it's probably going to work well with Seek.
right. Is it possible to also work with unstructured data? So if it's not, we don't have these rows and columns, can we also query unstructured data and get information back from that?
Seek in particular is much more focused on structured data because that's our focus is, on numbers and automating more like things like analytics or yeah, just, the
Mhm.
statistics that people want to know about the business. I do think that we will start incorporating more unstructured data connectors in the product over time to give
Mhm.
more business context to the AI. But I think at our core, we're always going to be kind of like a data driven, like data strategist almost
Right.
to our customers.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things I find interesting is this is prompt engineering. And, I didn't really appreciate how important it was until I was trying to use Runway ML to create a video. And
Yeah.
it became very clear that the way that I might communicate that I want a certain 10-second clip to go, AI may understand it entirely differently. Right. And so I have to be creative in the way that I structure the prompt to get the right output from the AI. Are there, in this case, in this use case of using an LLM to query data and to get back an output, some level of analysis, is it the same thing, right? And I think about that because the end user, do they have to have some skill set around prompt engineering to then get the right output from Seek?
I think that's a great question. No, the answer is absolutely not because we're working with business, you know, business professionals that they don't even know data analysis. That's why they can't access the data in the first place, and that's why they're going to the data team and asking them questions. So that would be just another layer of complexity is telling them, "Oh, you have to really like work with the prompt this way to get it to work and answer your questions." We're trying to make Seek just as easy to use as possible.
Right.
So, people don't even know what to ask sometimes when they start using it. And so that's why we have these kind of features where you can even just explore the data at a high level to just learn, what even do we have in the business that I can work with. But yeah, Seek is designed for you to be able to ask like usually like a few words or like a sentence or two. If you want to ask it something very elaborate, like I'm working on this project and I want to do this and this, that's also something that you should be able to ask Seek,
Mm-hmm.
but never like, oh, I know with the image generation, it's like I haven't used image generation in a while, but it used to be like make it Unreal Engine style, if you want it to be 3D, just none of that.
Yeah, the hallucinations for me, the hallucinations can be a bit frustrating just from the perspective that, and we can have this conversation around business models, but Runway specifically, right? You're paying, well, you get credits, right? Each credit is worth a certain amount of credits gets you a generation, but AI hallucinates. So your prompt, you may say it the way you think it should be said, but the AI still hallucinates. You're like, that's not what I wanted. Now I feel like I'm continuing to pay for a generation that has a hallucination that is not my error, but AI is just not super advanced to that point yet. So then you have to get really good at understanding, okay, what is the specific language that I need to speak so that the AI understands. And it's great that on your side, right, for someone to receive the analysis back from Seek, you can kind of just keep it pretty straightforward. So with that, how did you decide what the best business model, and startup world, things change, the best business model for Seek today? And I love this question particularly today because we focus a lot on SaaS solutions and the standard recurring revenue payment model, but then you've got some other companies that are usage based. And so I'm curious how you thought about that for Seek and what would be the best way for your customers to pay for the solution.
Yeah. I mean, we definitely spent a lot of time and tried a bunch of different things figuring it out. What we ended up deciding on that we have today was just the simplest solution, which is just charge a flat fee for the business, no complexity, just this is the price.
Hmm.
And I think our customers really like that approach because it's just simple and they know what they're going to get. I think it's a little contrarian in our space. I don't really see a lot of companies doing that, but we're a startup, we don't want to ruin a relationship or prevent a sale by, making it just too complex or making it too much about the price. I do
Hmm.
think that as we continue to evolve, the pricing will become more sophisticated over time.
Yeah.
But I mean, something that I would probably advise earlier stage founders is, not getting too hung up about price. I think it's more just figuring out what value can we add to the customers, because I'd rather be in a situation where you're not charging enough and you're adding a lot of value and the customers love the product. That's a
Hmm.
much better situation to be in than you did a great job selling and you're making a lot of money from a customer, but they're going to churn next year.
Right, right, yeah. And then when you mention a flat fee, it's like flat monthly fee, flat annual fee.
We're just a flat annual fee. Sometimes it's multi-year, but yeah, it's usually flat annual fee. And it depends on the size of the customer too. So
Right.
I mean, some of the things that factor in are things like the number of people that are going to be using it or the
Hmm.
amount of expected usage and the size of the business. And so we do have different tiers of pricing for different sizes of business, but
Right.
it's still one price, depending on the business.
Yeah. Is there a typical user? Like, for the examples you got, I thought a lot about like someone who's very involved in strategy. But I mean, you could be in any unit within an organization and be involved in strategy. So I was curious if there's someone who is your kind of your standard user. This is the person who's going to use Seek.
Yeah, I think oftentimes it's marketing people within these consumer packaged goods companies, especially the bigger ones. I think things like identifying various groups of people that are buying the products and looking at their behavior and trying to, better kind of target them. That's tends to be the goal, I think, of some of the larger businesses that we work with in that industry. The smaller ones, it can be oftentimes like the CEO, the head of marketing, and oftentimes if they do have a data team, the data team's always the one using it, no matter what the size of the business. They're usually the first ones actually to use it and kind of get a feel for it. And then together we work with the business users.
Yeah, I would one thing I would love for you, and I mean, not you don't have to spill the secret sauce of Seek, but to kind of differentiate because we're talking about LLMs here. In an LLM, I could load up a file and ask it to analyze the file for me. What's the difference between what you're doing at Seek and someone just using like a Chat GPT and uploading a bunch of files?
So I would say at this individual CSV level, if you're just trying to analyze one CSV and you've already labeled it and you've already cleaned it very well, then I think ChatGPT should be a fine solution. I mean, if you just
Hmm.
want to analyze one CSV for yourself, like right away, I think ChatGPT is probably the best solution, actually. I think where Seek is kind of needed is more If you want to connect a lot of data, like a lot of tables, usually that's when you need a database and you have all the tables in that database. And that's where some of the complexity arises, where the data can sometimes not be well labeled or well documented. And then, then it's impossible to connect it to ChatGPT or anything else. And
Mhm.
that's really where we come in. And there's a lot of other benefits to it as well. Like ChatGPT, what if you want like five people to talk to the AI or look at the results of even one CSV?
Mhm.
That's where you also run into issues. So we do have some customers that do use Seek for simpler data like that because they like that, multiple people can collaborate even with a small data set, or they can even share it with their customers.
Mhm.
If you're a business that has not a lot of data, you can still work with Seek if you want your customers to just go into an AI interface and be able to interact with your
Mhm.
data.
Mhm.
So it's whether or not you have big data or small data, there are, certain things that Seek has that makes us appealing over any sort of more mainstream AI products.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. And is Seek able? So if I'm going and I'm asking it for some level of analysis, like show me my transaction. If I'm e-commerce platform and my customer wants to query their transactions, let's say here, show me my top 5 products and unit sales over 12 months. Is Seek able to spit out like an Excel file, or is it more so here? I'm going to show you the output on in the browser. Like, how far do you go with the analytics and what you can serve back to the user?
Yeah, you can just download it as a CSV or, probably someday an Excel file. But yeah, you can totally just download it and do whatever you want with it in Excel if you're an Excel user. So we have all sorts of stuff like that makes it easy to, say you want to put it in like a PowerPoint presentation. We try to make it as easy as possible to be able to present it if you want to format it outside of the Seek platform.
Yeah, yeah. I want to come back to we had a conversation around whether it's a small business or a large business when they need to organize their data, where their starting point should be. I know you were you mentioned when you launched Seek, it was just you, but I'm curious, something like what is it? What are the skill sets? What are the type of individuals it takes to even build a platform like this?
I think to build something like Seek kind of required a couple kind of almost disjoint kind of traits. Like I think most data scientists that I meet, they're not necessarily really hardcore on the machine learning side. And, I think a lot of them are really kind of curious more from the data analysis side and really good at exploring data. And
Hmm.
the really good data scientists in a business, usually they're good at understanding the business problems very well and like kind of using machine learning selectively if it's needed to get to the answer or make a prediction.
Hmm.
That's what I think I've seen. Just I'm generalizing, but I think that's what I've seen in some of the best data scientists that I've worked with. Although that word can refer to so many different types of people too.
Yeah.
But I was the type of data scientist that was really kind of more of a machine learning researcher, I guess you would call it, at heart.
Hmm.
We didn't really have machine learning researchers, at least a lot of them, like back in the day when I was a data scientist, because, I started Seek in 2021.
Hmm.
So I think data scientist was the more common career path, even if you were doing a lot of machine learning. So I was kind of always more of like a machine learning person, but yet because I was a data scientist, I was doing all this data analysis stuff. And some of it I liked, but some of it was just so repetitive. So the machine learning part of me just kept thinking, I wish I could just automate this. So I kind of had those two aspects to myself that I think made me an ideal founder for a company that automates data analytics. But it's kind of a weird, kind of niche use case, I would say.
Just kind of picking up one of the places where I kind of wanted to go with this as well is just thinking through. You got a lot of companies that are kind of making build. Do we build this internally? Do I go find a vendor who's already solved this? For the folks who are making that decision, what do you think are the major sticking points that they should consider as they make this build buy decision for this, unique AI product?
Yeah, something that I heard in a discussion recently with some executives is kind of thinking about the difference between CapEx and OpEx and kind of where the spend falls. Because, just because you think that maybe you're improving one of those metrics, if you're choosing to just build versus buy, you're still spending, just in a different metric. So,
Yeah.
so that's kind of, I think, a pretty interesting way to look at it. I think from my perspective, what we try to learn with customers that are trying to build this is we try to just educate them on what it took us to build it. And, we
Hmm.
kind of just point out what are some of the harder things that you're going to need to solve on your own, if you're trying to solve this problem. And, do you feel like you have the talent in house, or, would you need to hire some people to really get something that works and something that meets your goals? I would say the vast, proportion of companies that come to us, usually they tried to build it themselves and it failed. And that's when they realize, you know what, this is not our wheelhouse. This isn't what our company does. We don't want to put any more resources kind of like banging our head against a wall. We just want to hire a company that this is what the company does.
When they tried to build, where did they run into a wall, right? Because one might think, oh, I've got some data, it's structured. Let me just hire some data engineers, some data scientists, and we'll tell them to go find, Llama, connect to Open AI, and we're good to go. It sounds like a simple solve, is what I'm saying. I'm curious where those people just ran into a wall and said, "Hey, Sarah, you know what? We're scrapping our plans. We're Hook us up to see, please."
Yeah, there's it's one of those things where it's kind of elusive, and that's why so many companies try to build this. It's elusively hard. It doesn't really come across to people. I know when I started the company, I didn't really approach it in the beginning as I'm solving a hard problem. I thought it was going to be a lot easier than it ended up being. But the thing about data is that working with data has like hundreds of these little nuances of just that make it so hard for even people to work with data. And
Mhm.
so when you're trying to automate that, you start bumping into all these little edge cases and all these little nuances that you didn't even know were going to be there. So I would say it's kind of dealing with all the different complexities of the data. I think a big issue that also comes up is companies ultimately end up realizing, who am I building this for? I'm building it for business stakeholders that don't know how to access data. Usually that's the reason they're building it in the first place. And they start to
Mhm.
realize, what do the business stakeholders want to ask about? And, that's when they start to realize, okay, this needs to be more than even just answering questions. It's got to be a whole dialogue system, that they actually want to use, and
Mm.
it makes it easy. And that's when they have to start thinking about UI, UX. And if you're like a data team, you're
Ah.
like, oh, I don't even know anything about UI, UX, and nobody's using it. It's not getting adoption. I think that's a big aspect of it. Another aspect of it is just, oh, I didn't realize that, I had way more data. I have so much data I want to connect, and yet, I can't put all of it into the context window. And that's when you have to build like a retrieval system. And sometimes people run
Mhm.
into issues there building an intelligent enough retrieval system to actually retrieve the right data for the question. So you end up with a pretty complex system at the end of the day with a lot of sprawl. And you didn't really expect that when you started out. I think that's what we see.
And I want to transition that, or as a good segue into conversations with investors. I imagine at some point, well, maybe if they're up to speed on LLMs and they're saying, well, isn't this just what ChatGPT does? I'm curious your conversations with investors. Have they immediately seen the value prop, or did it take some, let me explain this. Let me explain what the value prop for this particular AI application is?
It really depends. I mean, because I started the company, like I said, as a solo founder in late 2021,
Mhm.
that experience was really different than it is, today.
Right. Oh, fair enough. In 2021, cash was flush. People were just, throwing checks everywhere. Fair enough.
Yeah, no, cash was flush for everyone, probably except AI companies, I would say. Like, I mean, the thing about AI, it was not a world at all back then.
Mhm.
Nobody cared about it. I feel like for a while, crypto and AI kind of had their own respective hype cycles where one would go up and one would go down. And that was like the
Mhm.
peak of the crypto hype cycle. And as a result, I think a lot of people, there used to be this weird rivalry between the two where it was kind of like crypto is like pro privacy, and then AI people are like worried about AI tracking you. We
Mhm.
had those
Mhm.
kind of, worries, I think, too. And so I think it was actually, those that invested Seek in the early days were the ones that could see past all of the sort of like momentum trends in the VC world and really understand the company and what we were trying to do. And those are the real contrarian investors that ended up making a good bet before ChatGPT. But it was really
Mhm. Mhm.
hard. I really had to explain it from first principles to people. And it turns out, a lot of people just they don't invest on first principles. They invest on momentum or, something
Right.
else. So it's a lot harder to, to pitch a company in that way. You have to be very persistent. But, these days, like the momentum's there, obviously. We're in the middle of this huge hype cycle. So the questions are
Mhm.
actually a lot more specific to my business now than they were in the beginning. It's not about, is this industry real? Like, could this product ever add value? Like, it's a lot more like, you know, I guess these days, like really honing in more on, what's our ICP, what's our strategy, things like that, that are more kind of assuming we're going to be successful.
Yeah. And I know we're coming up on time here, but I did want to reserve some time to get your perspective with you being, so heavily involved in Gen AI, your perspective on the future of AI, or if you want to go that route, Gen AI.
Yeah, I mean, I think that AI has continued to improve a lot this year because of agents. I mean, if you look at the performance of the large language models themselves from last year to this year, it's not as impressive as it was from 2022 to 2023. 2023 to 2024 has been a huge improvement, but in my opinion, it's because people are getting better at developing agents.
Mm.
I think that's going to continue from 2024 to 2025. I think that people are just going to keep better at getting better at developing agents. Agents are going to keep getting better at developing agents. And also, it's also about the data. Like I know with Seek, one of our biggest initiatives is helping our customers just get their data in a place that, where it works well with AI. I think actually data is going to be kind of the third pillar of that, just having
Mhm.
your data in a format where it's machine readable. That's probably going to be a huge trend, I think, even beyond 2025 into like the next few years and beyond.
Yeah, super interesting because that's something that I've heard from day one. My initial interest in AI, even when we started this podcast, right, like 4 years ago, it's about the data. And still, if you look at the statistics, like that's still one of the biggest challenges. Although everyone's saying we have this huge initiative to implement AI across the entire organization, we're still stuck on this. Let's get our data strategy right. Which has been is interesting that continues to be the discourse.
Yeah, and we definitely understand that because as a company that's automating a lot of data, reporting and analytics and, data questions for businesses, we can't be doing that unless we're also helping companies with their data and making sure that the agents can actually talk to the data. So, yeah, I think we know that better than, most people.
I'm super excited for agents. I was looking at some of the use cases of AI agents using Claude, and I was like, oh, "This is awesome!" Just some of the things that even now are possible. Now I'm like, okay, in 1 or 2 years, it was probably going to blow us away. So yeah, I definitely have my eye on that as well. Last question here: anything we should be looking out for Seek, or anything you want to announce now that we're not quite at 2025 yet, but almost there?
Yeah, well, we're gonna have a booth at the NRF conference and at the Javits Center. I think it's gonna be in January in New York. So anybody in the consumer packaged goods industry is gonna be there. Just hit me up. I'm just, just at Sarah Nagy on Twitter, or it's just Seq.ai. So that's probably the most short term announcement of conference where we're gonna have a booth. But yeah, you can also follow us on Twitter. We're just AI underscore Seek, or my Twitter is just at Sarah or Nagy. So yeah, little plug about me. Thanks for letting me do that.
No, no worries, no worries. And we'll make sure we get your contact information into our show notes so folks can find you. But super helpful. I appreciate you allowing us to do a deep dive into Seek, and then for you to share so much as you on the data, on agents and whatnot. So appreciate your time, Sarah.
Yeah, thank you. This was a lot of fun. I really
Absolutely.
appreciate you having me.